Forget everything Hollywood taught you about the Old West. The lone rider silhouetted against a sunset, the quick-draw duels in dusty streets, the pristine leather chaps, and the endless, lawless frontier. These are the powerful, enduring images etched into our collective consciousness. A romanticized fantasy spun from dime novels and silver screens that, while captivating, often misses the true mark. But what if I told you that the life of a real cowboy, the men and women who actually herded cattle across vast, untamed landscapes, was a brutal, monotonous, and often profoundly unglamorous existence, a stark contrast, far removed from the heroic tallies we cherish. Today, we're tearing down the myths and digging into the hard, dusty ground of historical reality to uncover 7 shocking truths about cowboy life in the real Old West. Prepare to have your long-held perceptions lassoed, thrown to the ground, and branded with the unyielding iron of historical fact. What you're about to learn will not only redefine your understanding of these iconic figures, but also deepen your appreciation for the sheer grit and resilience required to survive, let alone thrive, in the unforgiving crucible of the American frontier. Our first shocking truth immediately shatters the monochromatic image of the cowboy painted by popular media. When you picture a cowboy, chances are a rugged, stoic white man comes to mind, perhaps with a weathered face and steely gaze. But the reality is a vibrant tapestry of cultures and ethnicities, a far more diverse and inclusive picture. A staggering number, with estimates ranging from 25% to even a third of all cowboys were African American. Many of these courageous men were formerly enslaved individuals, freed by the Civil War, who found in the open range a degree of freedom, respect, and opportunity that was tragically largely denied to them in the more settled communities and agricultural South. Names like Nat Love, known as Deadwood Dick, a renowned marksman and bronco buster, and Bill Pickett, the brilliant inventor of bulldogging, the technique of wrestling a steer to the ground, were legendary figures. Their skills on horseback and with cattle often unmatched and widely celebrated among their peers. Beyond African Americans, the very techniques, the essential gear, and even the terminology of cowboying owe their profound origins to the Mexican vaquero. These skilled horsemen and cattle herders had been working the Spanish and Mexican frontiers for centuries, developing sophisticated methods long before American cowboys ever rode north. Words like rodeo, lasso, bronco chaps, and even buckaroo, a direct corruption of vaquero are direct linguistic legacies of their profound influence. The gear itself, the specialized saddles, the lariats, the spurs, much of it was directly adopted or adapted from vaquero traditions. And let's not forget the Native Americans, many of whom, despite facing immense displacement and conflict, also worked with cattle, bringing their intimate knowledge of the land, local conditions, and animal behavior to the table. The simplistic image of the solitary, white Anglo-Saxon cowboy is a powerful but utterly misleading myth. The true frontier was a dynamic melting pot of races and cultures, united by the shared risks and incredibly hard work of the cattle drive. This diversity was not merely incidental. It was absolutely foundational to the development and very identity of cowboy culture itself, a testament to skill and necessity transcending racial divides. Next, let's talk about the threads, or rather the practical rags that clothed these working men. Hollywood loves to dress its cowboys in pristine, tailor-made outfits, crisp, colorful bandanas, spotless denim or wool trousers, gleaming, custom-tooled leather chaps, and hats that look like they just came off the shelf of a high-end haberdashery. The truth? A real cowboy's attire was anything but glamorous. Their clothes were not fashion statements. They were tools, extensions of their functionality, chosen for absolute durability, crucial protection, and unwavering practicality in the face of relentless sun, biting wind, driving rain, thorny brush, and endless choking dust. Imagine wearing the same pair of heavy canvas trousers, perhaps reinforced with leather patches, for weeks or even months on end without a proper wash. Your shirt, probably made of coarse wool or thick cotton, would be sweat, stained, dust-caked, and very likely patched in multiple places from tears and snags. Bandanas weren't just for show. They served as essential dust masks during trail drives, sweat rags in the searing heat, makeshift bandages for injuries, or even as a rudimentary filter for muddy water. Chaps, far from being decorative, were indispensable protection against thorns, biting insects, rattlesnakes, and the constant chafing from riding for hours on end. Their hats, typically made of durable felt, were battered, reshaped by years of weather and wear, offering crucial shade and protection from the elements. These items were not discarded and replaced lightly. They were cherished, mended, and worn until they literally fell apart at the seams. Every stitch, every patch, every faded crease and stain told a story of hard labor under an unforgiving sky. Functionality trumped style every single time, making the romanticized wardrobe of the silver-screen cowboy a stark and often comical contrast to the grim, pragmatic reality of the working man. Our third revelation might just be the most shocking for those steeped in Western lore. The image of the quick-draw artist, constantly ready to engage in a duel at high noon over a perceived slight or territorial dispute, is perhaps the most pervasive and misleading myth of the Old West. In reality, guns were far less common, far less dramatically used, and often actively discouraged. Cowboys were working men, laborers, not professional gunslingers. A pistol, particularly a reliable Colt .45, was an incredibly expensive piece of equipment, often costing a month's wages or even more. For a working cowboy, that precious money was almost always better spent on essential gear like a sturdy saddle, durable boots, or another reliable horse. When guns were carried, they were primarily considered tools for specific purposes. A rifle or shotgun was used for hunting game to supplement meager rations during long drives or for protection against dangerous predators like wolves or coyotes that threatened the herd. A pistol, if carried at all, was more of a last resort for genuine emergencies, not a fashion accessory or a primary means of conflict resolution in every disagreement. Furthermore, in many burgeoning cattle towns, especially during the height of the cattle drive era, strict ordinances were actively enforced prohibiting the carrying of firearms within city limits. Cowboys entering town were often required to check their weapons at the marshal's office or a local saloon before they could even step foot on the boardwalk. Law and order, even in the raw frontier, was a serious business, and towns actively sought to prevent the very gunfights that Hollywood immortalized, understanding they were bad for business and public safety. The true skill of a cowboy lay not in their speed with a six-shooter, but in their mastery of the lariat, their unparalleled horsemanship, and their ability to manage a herd of thousands of unpredictable, often dangerous animals. The gun was a tool of necessity, not a symbol of everyday life or a solution to every petty dispute. The fourth truth takes aim at another cherished stereotype, the lonely cowboy. A rugged individualist riding off into the sunset, beholden to no one but his own code. While the open range could certainly feel vast and isolating, particularly during long hours on watch, the reality of cowboy life, especially during the great cattle drives, was profoundly communal. You simply could not manage thousands of head of cattle, crossing hundreds of miles of treacherous, often hostile terrain, entirely by yourself. Cattle drives were massive logistical operations, requiring a tightly knit crew of anywhere from 8 to 15 men, sometimes more. This wasn't just a random collection of individuals. It was a highly organized team, each member with a specific, vital role. There was the seasoned trail boss, who oversaw everything and made all the critical decisions, the point riders who carefully led the herd, the flank riders tirelessly working to keep the herd together and moving, the drag riders eating the most dust at the rear and dealing with the slowest, most troublesome cattle, the horse wranglers who managed the essential, *Remuda*, the herd of extra horses, and perhaps most importantly, the cook, whose chuck wagon was often the heart of the camp and the crucial source of sustenance, comfort, and morale. These men lived, ate, slept, and worked together for weeks or months on end, facing shared dangers and hardships. Their very survival depended on mutual reliance, absolute trust, and seamless cooperation. A cowboy who couldn't pull his weight, who was unreliable, or who couldn't work harmoniously with the crew was quickly identified and weeded out. The notion of the solitary cowboy is a poetic, romantic ideal, but the practical reality was one of intense, demanding teamwork, where camaraderie forged through shared hardship created unbreakable bonds that often lasted a lifetime. Our fifth shocking truth challenges the cinematic portrayal of every cowboy as a born horse whisperer, effortlessly taming wild broncos with a flick of the wrist and riding them into submission with raw, untamed skill. While horsemanship was undoubtedly a fundamental, non-negotiable skill for any working cowboy, it's a significant exaggeration to claim that every single cowboy was an expert bronc buster or a master trick rider. The horses they rode were primarily working animals, bred and chosen for their stamina, reliability, and resilience, not for showmanship or spectacular feats. Most cowboys rode sturdy, well-trained horses that were already broken and accustomed to the rigorous demands of cattle work. Their goal was efficiency, endurance, and safety, not on performing dazzling displays of equestrian prowess. A cowboy needed a horse that could work long hours, navigate difficult, often dangerous terrain, and respond reliably to commands in critical situations. Breaking wild, unbroken horses was a highly specialized and incredibly dangerous job, often left to specific individuals known as bronco busters or rough riders, men who possessed a unique blend of courage, strength, and an almost intuitive understanding of horses. It wasn't an everyday activity for the average cowboy, nor was it expected. Many cowboys learned to ride out of necessity, some starting as young as children, and, while they became highly competent and capable riders, their focus was squarely on the practical application of riding, herding, chasing down strays, and covering vast distances, not on performing dazzling displays of equestrian skill for an audience. The romantic image of every cowboy being a natural-born rodeo star wildly exaggerates the practical demands and grim realities of their daily interactions with their equine partners. For our sixth truth, let's confront the myth of the endlessly open range. The very term Old West often conjures images of boundless, unfenced prairies, where millions of cattle roamed freely across vast public and private lands. And for a brief, glorious period, this was largely true, defining the very essence of the cattle kingdom. However, this era of limitless expanse was remarkably short-lived and quickly transformed by a seemingly innocuous, yet revolutionary invention: barbed wire. Introduced in the 1870s, barbed wire was an absolute game-changer, fundamentally altering the landscape and the very nature of ranching forever. It was relatively cheap to produce, incredibly effective at containing livestock, and could be erected quickly and efficiently, allowing homesteaders, small farmers, and larger ranching operations alike to define, protect, and manage their land with unprecedented ease. What followed was a series of bitter and often incredibly violent conflicts known as range wars. Established cattle barons, who had grown accustomed to letting their immense herds graze freely across vast tracts of public and unfenced private land, suddenly found their traditional routes, crucial watering holes, and grazing grounds blocked by these new, thorny barriers. Farmers, on the other hand, rejoiced at the ability to protect their precious crops from wandering, destructive livestock without the need for expensive, labor-intensive stone or rail fences. These conflicts weren't just isolated skirmishes. They were widespread, involving everything from clandestine fence-cutting and retaliatory cattle rustling to outright shootouts, arson, and assassinations. The open range quickly became a contested, fragmented landscape carved up and enclosed by fences, leading inexorably to the demise of the long cattle drives and ushering in an era of more controlled, settled ranching. The iconic image of the free-roaming cowboy against an infinite horizon was rapidly being enclosed, quite literally, by a few strands of wire, marking the beginning of the end for their traditional way of life. Finally, for our seventh and perhaps most poignant truth, the classic era of the cowboy, the one defined by the great cattle drives, the truly open range, and the romanticized figure we imagine, was surprisingly brief. Hollywood and popular culture often give the impression of an enduring, decades-long epic, a vast historical period stretching across generations. However, the true golden age of the cowboy, roughly from the end of the Civil War in 1865 to the devastating blizzards of the late 1880s, spanned only about 2 decades, perhaps a little more, making it a fleeting, though impactful, chapter in American history. This short lifespan was due to a confluence of powerful, converging factors: the rapid expansion of railroads, while initially fueling the cattle drives by providing a way to get beef to eastern markets, eventually led to the establishment of local railheads much closer to the ranches themselves, eliminating the economic necessity for long-distance, arduous drives. Barbed wire, as we just discussed, carved up the open range, making the old ways of free grazing and trail driving increasingly impossible and dangerous. Severe winters, particularly the devastating Great Die-Up of 1886 to 1887, which brought unprecedented blizzards and extreme cold, wiped out vast numbers of cattle and consequently bankrupted many ranchers, forcing a profound shift towards more controlled fenced-in ranching methods and hay production. Overgrazing also severely depleted the natural grasslands, further pressuring ranchers to manage their herds more carefully and sustainably. The relentless forces of modernization, technology, and an unforgiving nature converged to swiftly bring an end to the romanticized era of the independent, free-roaming cowboy. While ranching continued and cowboys adapted, finding new roles and methods, the iconic figure of the trail driver, navigating an untamed wilderness, faded into history, leaving behind a powerful but largely mythical legacy that continues to capture our imagination. So, there you have it. 7 shocking truths that pull back the curtain on the real life of a cowboy in the Old West. From the diverse faces beneath the brim of a hat to the practical grime on their clothes. From the rarity of the gunfight to the absolute necessity of teamwork. From the skilled but functional horsemanship to the rapid enclosure of the open range. And finally, to the surprisingly brief lifespan of their iconic era. The reality was a world far tougher, far grittier, and infinitely more complex than the legends suggest. It was a life of back-breaking labor, constant exposure to the elements, meager pay, and perpetual danger, lived by men and women of incredible resilience, determination, and adaptability. They weren't just romantic figures, were vital cogs in a rapidly industrializing nation, shaping the landscape and economy of a young America with their sweat and their courage. Understanding these truths doesn't diminish their legacy. It deepens our appreciation for the extraordinary challenges they faced and the authentic human spirit they displayed. The real cowboy was a hero not because he was a mythical figure, but precisely because he was a human being who endured the unvarnished, brutal reality of the frontier. If you found these truths as fascinating as we did, and you're eager to uncover more hidden histories and debunk other enduring myths of the Old West, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. We've got plenty more authentic stories and forgotten facts waiting for you. And tell us in the comments below, which of these shocking truths surprised you the most, and what other Old West myths would you like us to explore?